Hey everyone. I saw a video and I decided that I had to talk about it again. But this time I'm gonna be more nice about it. as I could. So um this video is mainly gonna be about the charting of both the Red and the Blue album. And so um let's first get some business out of the way. Um, the current number one album in both not only America but also in the UK is, in fact, 1989, Taylor's version. Now, if you don't know what this album is about, the reason why Taylor Swift had to re record this album as well as amongst other albums is because of the ownership of her masters. And so, for her to be able to own the rights for her to use any of the music that she's done on this album, she had to re-record this album, and that way she could be able to use these versions instead of using the original versions that came out back in 2011, I believe. So I'm This is a great album. I like it. I like both versions, but I do love what she did with this one. It's amazing. So at this moment, this album is number one both in the UK and the US. And it's no surprise that it is, considering that it was promoted at the tail end of her US tour of the Eras Tour, which also is getting some good press because of the tour film that came out from it. Now, so in a way, this album is in a way like an entirely new album. So why do I am talking about this one? Well, it's because everybody's saying the Red and Blue album are being denied the top spot because of this album. And the thing is, you cannot really blame Taylor Swift, and you cannot really blame how the charts are right now. The charts are not flawed at the moment. In a way, they're not, because you got to really look at the demographic that's out right now. The demographic is basically the millennials and Gen Z, as well as Generation Alpha. They're listening to 1989, So, and there's there's more of those generations listening to this than there are of what we call the boomer generation. But not to knock down anything that's happening right now with the Beatles, because Now and Then is a very beautiful song. I truly do love it. People were very skeptical about it. I entered the whole fandom of this with an open mind, because I knew that it was Beatles again. We're getting not only Paul Ringo together, but we're also getting another great song from John Lennon that he wrote, as well as we're getting elements from George's playing from when they're attempting this in 1995. So I'm so happy that we have gotten um, and yes, Now and Then is like the number one single in Britain, which is great. And, and it's also like the number one digital single here in America as well. So it is doing good. But I know that that's not enough for a lot of people. And and especially when it comes to the charting of the new Red and Blue packaging. So I want to discuss the charting of the Red and Blue albums. So the first albums came out back in 1973. These were the original ones that came out here in America. And the charting for these is in 1973 for the Red album. Let's look at charting for Red album. The highest charting position that it got in the UK was number 3. And for the highest charting position in the US was also number 3 as well. For the Blue album, however, the highest charting position was number 2 in the UK and number 1 in America. So this one had like the top spot here in our country. Now, let's look at the charting for the other versions of this album. Now we're going to go into the 1993 versions. of the album. That's how they look. And so the charting position for the Red Album, we're gonna look at the Red Album again. The highest charting position in the UK was number 4, and number 2 here in America. Even though they did mention something about the charting of number 2 of the US, it was more like a top catalog charting, so it wasn't really an album charting. But I could be wrong. I need to look at that again. But for the Blue Album, the highest charting position was number 4 in England, in the UK, and also it went back to number 1 here in the US. So this album is proving again to be the number 1 contender out of both sets. Now we're gonna go into the 2010 reissue that came out on both CD and vinyl. So, which is these versions right here. So for the Red Album, the highest charting position in the UK was number 6, whereas here in America was number 32. Number 32 in 2010. And then for the for the Blue Album, I'm sorry, the highest charting position in England was number 4, and in America was number 29. Little bit higher than this album, but it sort of went down. Now we're gonna look at the current charting position of the 2023 versions, which is these right here. I just got these yesterday. Took a long time for them to get here from fucking Tennessee. But now let's look at the charting position. Sadly, they have not charted here in America. They just haven't. But in the UK, the Red Album charted at number 3, whereas the Blue Album charted at number 2. So it seems that for this turnaround, going into, 50, 60 years from now? I think it's 50 years since 73. Yeah. So 50 years all around, both of these went back charting on their original positions. This charted in 73 at number 3. I mean, number 3, and then again in 2023 back number 3. Whereas this charted at number 2 in the UK in 73, and has charted again at number 2 in 2023. And so it's you cannot really blame Taylor Swift for its charting. Even though people could make the argument that it should have been number 1 because of Now and Then. But, hey Eddie, but it is not number 1. Sorry. At the moment. All that stuff.
Oh shit, thank you. Okay. My dad at work?
Yeah.
Okay. Bye, Polly, thank you.
That was my...
don't know who that is.
That was my cousin, people. Yeah, because I'm filming here in my kitchen area. So you cannot really blame Taylor Swift, and you can make the argument that it should have went to number 1 in England, especially with the new song Now and Then. But I guess England were fine on giving it its original highest charting position from 1973, which was number 2. And the red one, number 3. So that's going to be my argument in this video. You cannot really blame Taylor Swift. You cannot really blame anybody else. That's just the way that it is right now. But I'm glad that it's doing great right now. I'm glad that these albums are like back on back on the charts again 50 years later. That's all you could really ask for. Like beggars cannot be choosers, right? And so, just for it being a highest charting albums in 2023, considering all the other artists that are coming out with albums right now, and just be grateful that it is the Beatles on top, considering that there's like a lot of bands that have been putting out reissues that sadly those reissues will never reach the heights of the Beatles. Like Brian Ferry just reissued his 1993 beautiful album called Memuna. And I don't know what was the original charting for that back in 1993, but I'm pretty sure it's not gonna chart as big as the Beatles' Red and Blue album, nor as another artist that also reissued another album, Katie Melua. She has reissued her 2003 album, Call Off the Search. And it's been reissued on vinyl as well as expanded CD as well. And that album is not going to chart in the same way that the Beatles' Red and Blue albums are charting right now. And, Hackney Diamonds, we don't know what's going on with Hackney Diamonds with Rolling Stones. It doesn't look like it charted any higher. I still need to look at the charting for that one. But, that's not doing good. But the Beatles are doing great. So even though today they have the number 2, number 3 top albums in the UK, let's be grateful for that. And also let's be grateful that the other reissue albums have been charting very, very high. Sgt. Pepper Remix went to number 1. The White Album Remix went to number 1. Abbey Road Remix went to number 1. Let It Be, I believe, did also go to number 1. Revolver only went to number 2, from what I've seen, heard. And so that's where we're at right now with the Beatles. They're still hitting those high charts. They're still making it into the top 5. In the high top 5, may I add. So come on, let's be adults. Stop ragging on Taylor Swift. It's not her fault. What do you want? Do you want her to go on fucking social media and tell people, hey, guess what? The Beatles have reissued their Red and Blue album. Go buy it as well. Do you want her to help out the Beatles style albums just so they could make number 1 too? That is just pathetic thing to try to ask, if you ask me. Because the Beatles don't need no help from Taylor Swift. They don't need help from Taylor Swift. They're the Beatles. Their music speaks for themselves. Their legend speaks for themselves. So, I'm glad that they're back on top. That's one guy whose albums are never going to go back on top. Elvis Presley. Now remember how their fans were back in the 60s when the Beatles were coming up. They're like, what the fuck is this? What the fuck's a Beatle? Is those things that crawl around the floor like cockroaches? Why the fuck are they calling themselves the Beatles? It's like, it's all about Elvis, people. Back then it was all about Elvis. It's all about, Return to Sender, Little Sister, Heartbreak Hotel, Jailhouse Rock. It's like, fuck this, I want to hold your hand shit. That's what their fans were saying back in the 60s about the Beatles. Look what the legacy is for this guy. This guy, they could put out as many reissues that they can of this guy, and I know they have too. None of them are going to go to number 3 or number 2 or number 1. It's going to be the Beatles. So fucking be grateful that the Beatles are going to number 1. Because this guy's not going to get there. Nuh-uh. Elvis Presley's not gonna get there. The fucking Beatles are gonna get there. So be fucking happy, people. Stop bragging on Taylor Swift. That's all I'm gonna say. That's all I'm gonna say. The Beatles fans are supposed to be more open-minded about this. What the fuck? Come on. That's all I'm gonna say. As Ringo says in his thing, peace and love. And as my friend Sir James Bowie, Sinatra, White, Lennon says, Beatles forever. Beatles forever.